Good morning, everyone. Spencer, you talked a lot about how responding to employee reviews on Glassdoor has established a culture of transparency at Zillow and how that transparency shapes your brand, your employer brand. How do you use the feedback that you receive on Glassdoor internally?
I used to personally respond to every review on Glassdoor, and I found that actually it was more effective and useful to have 5 or 6 of us do it based on what the review was. So now one person triages. So every time a new review comes in, somebody in HR triages and sends a mail to the person that's responsible for responding, the relevant executive, and then copies the rest and says this person will respond. So there's a link in that one. So I click through on everyone and I read everyone at that point. But because the relevant executive has to respond, the to-do, the action item of thinking if there's any follow-up required, in addition to just responding on Glassdoor, obviously, is already staffed. It's already determined that person, and they know that they need to do it. So in fact, last night I got an email from from an executive, I won't say which one, saying, I know you're doing the Glassdoor thing tomorrow. I'm really sorry. I'm a couple days behind on my Glassdoor reviews. I just wanted to flag that for you in case somebody says that some of them haven't responded to. So I was like, it's okay. Get to it this weekend. Or next couple days, I said. But, the other, I will share a little prop here. So every year, my family sits down and writes New Year's resolutions together. And I print it in tiny little font for each of the 5 family members, and I keep it in my wallet all year. And then every couple months, I kind of pull it out and say, how are we tracking towards our New Year's resolutions? So one of my New Year's resolutions. Really? This is going to your head's going to explode in a second, Robert. Okay. So one of my New Year's resolutions is Glassdoor 90%, which means I want to have a CEO approval rating of 90% or better in 2015. And I had it in 2014. It was on my New Year's resolutions too. So that's how seriously I take this stuff.
Great.
That's cool.
Great.
That's cool. Can I just jump in on that for 1 second too? And I think again, what's up underneath a lot of this is just the humility to embrace this and to approach it. I mean, it kind of oozes out of you. But to break it down for a second, it's just like, a lot of companies and leaders feel this need, and CEOs in particular, but executives overall, feel this need to pretend that you're perfect and that you know all the answers, when in fact everybody knows you don't. And in fact, it's sort of public where you've messed up, and you just gotta, you need to admit that we're human beings, and that is sometimes some of the most powerful stuff. I would also add too, so there's great research that just came out of the UK. There's a doctor, I forget his name, who just published a research report.
Tom Larkin.
Thank you.
Got it.
Thank you. Who just published a research report. And what he said, again, it's the first time we've quantified this, we've known it for a while, but people have been trained over 2 decades of consuming user-generated content to know how to treat it, which is to say, when they see a negative review, they classify it. There is sort of the crazies,
Right.
which we've all seen, right? It's like just crazy, and just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There is their personal story doesn't map to mine. It's interesting information, but it doesn't seem that relevant to me. And then there's the common thread pattern where it's like, okay, 5 different voices saying the same thing in 5 different ways, and there's probably something really there. Like I need to ask about that in the interview or scratch a little bit, and that's how it works. And so I know a lot of companies. I've seen this where a lot of companies get myopically focused on like one bad review. Maybe I actually would love to hear how you think about this.
Well,
If I could just jump in, because this leads into my next question, and the survey that you cited actually found that 68% of respondents said that they said that they considered the site to be entirely or somewhat trustworthy, and participants ranked it as the 2nd most reliable source of employer information. And like you said,
second only to word of mouth.
Second only to word of mouth. Yes, some companies, as you were going to say, might be concerned about negative reviews. Can you talk about how those negative reviews can actually help the business?
Yeah.
And is that kind of transparency an opportunity for employers?
So I mean, I take every piece of negative feedback hard, whether it's a crazy on Twitter, complaining about something or a former employee. And we have a lot of salespeople that when they don't hit their numbers, we ask them to leave the company. That's just the brutal truth. And so it's hard for me when I see negative feedback from somebody that I know was an underperformer, whether they're in sales or anywhere, and and they post something, spiteful or revengeful or whatever. It's super hard. And at TripAdvisor we have the same thing, right? And for the first couple of years, when TripAdvisor started, hotels would just bury their head in the sand and wish this whole thing would go away. And that's, I think, how most companies probably are. And the right thing to do, though, is to acknowledge, apologize, and respond, and seem authentic in the response. So, try not to take it too personally, and we respond as best we can.
Great. Yeah. Robert, you mentioned in your intro that an employer brand isn't only visible to candidates. Competitors are paying attention to what's published on Glassdoor as well. Can you talk about how outside companies use information gleaned on Glassdoor?
Yeah, so again, it falls into a couple buckets. The big ones are investors. Certainly, I hear it constantly because it's been known, but it's becoming even more crystal clear that basically human capital and brains are what actually are the only thing that create value in a knowledge economy. And so your relationship to those brains and your ability to pull the best brains into the company and nurture them and grow them and give them a mission and vision is critical. And so a lot of investors turn to Glassdoor to get a window. Someone said yesterday a great phrase. It is a window into the soul of a company. It's a little bit of a glimpse into what's going on behind the scenes. And it's not the whole story. What the company says and the mission and vision and values and organizations change. And I want to be clear about that. Everybody knows it's not the whole story, but it's a part of the story. And it's an important part of the story. And so investors use it. We know vendors use it a fair amount, or partners use it a fair amount to get a sense of whether this is an organization I want to do business with and tie myself to. Yeah, it is.
So, on the investor front, I echo that. And something interesting happened about a year ago when your company, Bloomberg, started putting tweets onto the terminal. So if you have a Bloomberg terminal, you look up Z or ZG, our stock tickers, you'll see what's happening with the stock and what the news is, but you'll actually also see all of my tweets on the Bloomberg terminal and all of @Zillow Group's tweets. And what that did is all of these hedge funds, mutual fund investors, et cetera, that have these Bloomberg terminals, they're like, oh, social media, I can use that to learn what's happening in a company, duh, that makes sense. And then they went to Glassdoor. And so it's true that I frequently, when I meet with hedge funds or other investors of Zillow, they cite Glassdoor. With respect to competitors, funny story, we were fierce competitors with Trulia for many years, and then about a year ago, we acquired Trulia. I vividly remember in one of the first due diligence meetings when I sat down with my arch rival, Pete Flint, the founder and CEO of Trulia, one of the first questions I asked him was, so there are a couple negative reviews on Glassdoor about the sales culture at the Denver office. What's up with that? Is that true? Is there a problem there, or are those just a couple disgruntled people and I don't have to worry about that? And we spent about half hour discussing that topic, and the jumping off point were the reviews on Glassdoor. So competitors absolutely look at it. I know I was looking at the Trulia reviews. I know Trulia was looking at our reviews.
Recruiters use it too. So it's a powerful recruiting tool. I call it the what you should say to a candidate to get them to leave tool, right? Because it is, honestly, if a candidate sitting in front of you and you know what else they're considering or their current company, it is sort of mapped out right there, particularly if you have access to the employer center on the back end, the strengths and weaknesses of their existing culture, how it compares to the strengths and weaknesses of your culture and or the people you're competing with. And so you can just talk to them. Look, does work-life balance matter to you? Because you know that their existing company is weak at it and you're strong at it.
Right.
And so a lot of recruiters use that.
Right. And you talked about existing culture. So once a candidate becomes an employee, and they've done their due diligence and done their research on Glassdoor, how important is it for employers to maintain that level of transparency and kind of build that brand consistency internally?
It's important. We walk sort of a fine line at Zillow. I would love it if all of our employees would write reviews on Glassdoor, but I don't demand that they do it. I don't encourage them, aggressively, because that's not authentic. And I hate it when I when I get my hair cut and they're like, please review me on Yelp, please review me on Yelp, or when I go to a hotel and they're like, post review on TripAdvisor. I'm like, if it was really awesome, I'll do it, or if it was really terrible, I'll do it, and maybe I'll do it, but don't tell me to do it. And so we don't, we're not overly aggressive with our employees. I probably wish we were a little more aggressive. But I know employees read them for sure. And it's not, I know the questions about Glassdoor, I would just extend it. It's not just, it's really other forms of social media too. I was at Zillow, we do this event called a Tough Mudder, which is like an obstacle course, 11-mile race, through the woods and over walls and stuff. And we pay for all our employees that want to do it, and we have about 1 in 6 employees do it. We had 150 people at Seattle do it last weekend. And an employee came up to me at that event and said, I'm here because of your tweet. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, a year ago, you were at this event, and you were tweeting how awesome the Tough Mudder was and how great it is for Zillow culture. And I didn't work here at the time, and I thought that was so cool. And I said, I want to work at that type of company. And here I am a year later at the same event, and it's because you were sharing on social media this perk and how it was consistent with your core values. So Glassdoor for sure, but also forms of social media.
Yeah, it is true. It's a key part of authenticity. So we saw a fascinating thing when I was in travel, and you probably remember this. So TripAdvisor, there was this thing called the UGC effect, where basically it isn't so much a problem that a hotel is a 4-star hotel, so much as it's a problem when someone shows up expecting it to be a 5-star hotel. Right? That is the actual problem. If they know it's a 4-star hotel and that's what they're getting, and they get there and their expectations are met, the reviews are actually great. The reviews were only really bad when there was this disconnect. And so this question reminds me of that it's about authenticity, right? It's almost impossible, first off, to project a brand that's inauthentic or misaligned with what's actually internally going on with the company. But if in fact you don't pull it all the way through, it will show up, and it will undermine any work that you are putting into creating or managing this brand in the front end. It's got to be authentic and pulled all the way through.
And it's something that employers struggle with. Another survey that you all put on, and it was conducted by a Harris poll, found that 61% say they find aspects of a new job different than their expectations. So that's 6 in 10 people who take a job and they get there and they're either disappointed because they've made an arrangement with the company, you have an agreement, you have an expectation, and here you are, perhaps you've given up other offers, and here you are, and you're in a 4-star hotel versus a 5-star.
And that, I think that's a really interesting point. That's not going to change though, because these companies are so dynamic. I know in our case, a lot of people get hired to do one thing and they end up doing something else, because that's just life in the big city. Like at a tech company that's doing all sorts of crazy stuff, you kind of got to roll with it. And so the expectation that has to be set for them is, this is our mission when you join. Are you in for that? And this is the culture. Are you in for that? And today you're hired to do this particular thing, but I don't know, tomorrow it might be different. And so that kind of gets back to why it's so important to be transparent and about those things, and especially about the culture. Yeah. That's what you're signing up for. You're signing up to work for a company with that culture. The job that you're being hired for, today it's your job, but
it's a job.
I mean, it might change.
I think that's absolutely right. And back to, I think it's less of a problem now that people can peer into companies using tools like Glassdoor and social media and other forms. But the whole Amazon thing, that in the article that's written in the New York Times, it really is. People love working at Amazon. Actually, it's not a shock to them that work-life balance is not great. And in fact, if you go and read the reviews on Glassdoor, it's basically work-life balance kind of sucks. We work like mad, but I get to work with the smartest people I've ever worked with. I'm challenged like I've never been, and I am growing like I have never grown before. And I'll do this for a while, and that's the deal, and that's the deal also with we know that's the deal with companies like Deloitte, which just embrace it, or consulting companies, which are just investment banks. You're going to work harder, you're going to travel more.
I do it for a couple years. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Yeah. But boy, did it suck.
You did
time.
This, right?
Yeah.
You did this for a couple years.
And my brother just graduated college, and he's a first-year analyst at an investment bank, just like I was. He works 6 days a week. He never gets home before midnight. Usually he's home at 2 a.m., back in the office at 7 a.m. Has no life at all. But it's about expectation setting. He absolutely knew that's what it was like. That's what he signed up for. That's what he wants to do at this stage of his career. So yeah, it's a good point actually that it's all about expectations.
Yeah.
Let's pivot to HR analytics because that's a hot topic. Can you talk about how employers can use analytics available on Glassdoor to make a case to senior leadership about how employer brand impacts recruitment, retention, and the overall bottom line? You probably have a lot of recruiters in the room who are going to have to take this back and make a case as to why this is a value to their company. Can you give them a few talking points there?
I think the most shocking thing is the sheer volume of people that are researching your company. That is the thing that when I show someone, that's where I start. Is like most people and most companies are just shocked to see how many people are actually on the site. And so, and that's one of the, I think, the free things you get with a free employer account on Glassdoor is just to see the sheer volume. You will probably be surprised if you haven't looked at it already.
Right.
The sheer volume. And then beyond that, we've helped a bunch of companies who maybe are targeting millennials or whatever else, and you can dive right in and you can see, okay, here they are. Like they're here and they're learning about you and your culture, and here is how you communicate to them. Yeah.
I mean, I'll just say that a couple years ago, so I mentioned that I send this email to every engineering candidate that we make an offer to, talking about, please come work here. It's a great culture. It's exciting. It's innovative. Here's a link to a couple blog posts that I've written about our culture, and here's a link to our reviews on Glassdoor. And I started doing this a couple years ago. Originally, maybe 1 in 20 would sort of, in their reply, reference Glassdoor in some way. Now, I would venture to guess 80% of the people that reply are like, yeah, of course I read the reviews on Glassdoor. Like, thanks for including the link, but like, duh, like who doesn't use Glassdoor before, going all the way through an interview process. And I mean, our recruiters tell us that too, that most people are researching ahead of time. So yeah, candidates, employees, stakeholders. It's, I don't want to be giving a commercial. That wasn't my goal, but it's pretty darn ubiquitous.
But it is hard. I don't want to play down it's challenging, I think, to take it to a leadership team or a CEO that doesn't understand or get it yet. And so it would be interesting to kind of brainstorm, like, ways that you can bridge that gap. How many in the room would say, if your senior leadership doesn't get, like, will they admit that somewhere in the top three most important things is talent, like getting the right people? Because I think my perception is, anyway, even the most curmudgeonly of leaders and CEOs will grudgingly admit that people and talent is critical.
But then they immediately go to comp, I think, because the old school philosophy is like, well, just pay them more. And like that actually is not the solution, I don't think, at least for this generation of knowledge workers. Like, yeah, obviously it's important, but a lot of the research says that people want to be paid enough to feel like they're being treated fairly, and then above that, they care most about autonomy and mastery and purpose and mission. And as long as they feel like they're being treated fairly relative to what they can make elsewhere, relative to what their peers are making, then comp isn't actually the most important thing. It's culture. And that's, I think, the disconnect. And I mean, it's not, there are plenty of, I think, older CEOs in their 60s that get this, but I think it is a little generational. I think CEOs in their 20s, 30s, and 40s tend to get this more. Because a lot of this stuff, I mean, a lot of it on its face does kind of seem like sort of like touchy-feely or hokey. Like, if I can absolutely imagine, other, big company CEOs thinking like, what a bad use of the CEO's time to get involved in trying to close an individual candidate, or, you do some obstacle course thing in the mud, like that's stupid, like what a waste of money. Like, we would make the quarter if we didn't spend money on that. And so that is still out there. All those people will either be dead or retired within the 10 or 20 years. The market's coming to you.
That's going right on.
Is the good news.
That's going on the tweet stream.
Yeah. Or I should say, dead, retired, or fired, because they won't be able to retain great knowledge workers. People they want to work at cool companies that are doing innovative stuff.
They're suffering now.
When you're trying to get through to the CEO and you have this resistance, there's another survey from Universum that surveyed 2,000 CEOs, HR, and marketing executives in 18 countries. And the survey found that 60% of respondents believe that the responsibility for developing and managing an employer brand lies with the CEO. And 40% of marketing executives agreed. What are your thoughts on who in an organization is responsible for developing, managing, and maintaining an employer brand? If you're getting resistance from the CEO, who do you go to next?
Well, I mean, you know where I stand on this. Obviously, I think it's the CEO's job. I mean, the perfect example, it's in the news, right? Volkswagen. This is a venerable 50-year-old company that is being decimated because of a bad corporate culture. If you actually read the articles about what happened at Volkswagen, about why they faked their emissions data. They put software on their cars that created fake data to pass emissions tests. Read the articles about how that happened. It was because of the culture, because it was a culture that didn't allow dissent. And so engineers, the people actually doing all the hard work, were like, I can't meet the performance goals that are being demanded of me. The car has to go this mileage, whatever, and the emissions goals. It's just impossible from an engineering standpoint. And I can't tell my manager that it can't be done because like this culture will fire me in that way. And so I'll just fake it.
Right.
And I mean, that's what happens when you have a bad corporate culture. Really bad things happen.
Yeah.
People die, planes crash, like
right.
that, cars crash.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about culture and your CEO is not understanding the importance of how it eventually will affect the product, it will affect the consumer experience, how can the folks in this room kind of build a case and explain to the CEO, does marketing need to be involved?
Yeah.
Do you need to go to finance to explain to them the kind of losses that a company might incur if they don't understand the strength of the brand?
Oh, because
His background is finance.
Because it usually costs money, because this stuff isn't free. I mean, these types of things, creating culture ain't cheap. So, usually finance isn't the way to get that done. Now, in our case, our new CFO was the COO who also ran HR. So actually, it happens to be the woman that built our culture, who is our CFO, but it's a very rare case. No, the right way, if you hit a resistant CEO, I think, is to find somebody in marketing, because HR can say all day long, look, we can't recruit and retain great people, but if you have an obstinate CEO, which I mean, really, are there really people like that? I guess there wasn't Volkswagen. Okay, yeah. All right. Well, anyway,
yes.
If there really are those types of people out there still, then I think it has to kind of come from the side, from some senior marketing executive who has the CEO's ear, who can try to give them a non-HR perspective on why this stuff matters.
I completely agree. And increasingly, I spoke with someone yesterday who really helped articulate this for me. He used an analogy. I don't know if Peter's here today, but man, I loved it. He said, brand, employment brand and product brand are sort of like two strands that make up DNA. It's all your brand. It's just the other side, and they're not separate. Like, they overlap and bleed into each other. I love that imagery. It really helped kind of crystallize it for me. And the marketers are sometimes the best at being able to help break through and communicate that to executives that are having a hard time. I agree with that.
I have just
with data too.
A very quick story. I was talking with the CEO of a public $5 or $10 billion company, big company, and they're a parts supplier for the transportation industry. You would have never heard of this company because it's not a consumer brand. And I was comparing notes with him on corporate culture, and he said, well, we still have an executive lunchroom. Everyone wears coat and tie. You're Mr. This or Mrs. That, and that's our corporate culture. And and he was probably in his 60s, and this was just last week, and he's like, I know that's a problem. Like, I know it is. I know we will not. He's like, we can't hire anyone under 30, which can't. And I get it. Like, I realize that means we're pretty screwed, in 10 years. But I don't know what to do about it. So here was a CEO sort of like throwing his hands up, and he was in his 60s wearing a coat and tie as he was telling me this. And so at least, I guess the first step is acknowledging that you have a problem. And he should probably be here, and learning from all of you who are already at innovative companies that have recognized this problem 5 years ago and are doing something about it.
Great. I think we have a couple questions from the audience coming in.
Awesome. We do, yeah. So we're going to start with a couple questions from the live stream on GD Summit. And the first question was actually asked first by Emily Miller and several others since, and that's really for both of you. What advice would you give to companies who don't want to risk responding to reviews?
It's a good one. I actually hear this one a lot.
Really?
That they feel like they're endorsing, a bad review if they respond to it. And I even hear it from companies who respond to most or all reviews, and there'll be that negative one there with no response.
If two people were over there talking crap about you, wouldn't you want to go join the conversation? I don't know. I would. If you were like, God, Spencer's a total a-hole. Like, I'd be like, oh, I want to correct that misperception. Like, I just don't get that. I mean,
the argument I've heard is that by somehow responding to it or even acknowledging that it exists is somehow endorsing the message in it. It is perhaps doesn't make logical sense, but that's the feeling.
The ship has sailed. I mean, I guess if you thought that, and hotels did this, with TripAdvisor in the early days. I guess if you were like, maybe it'll go away, maybe it'll go away, maybe it'll go away. But like, I mean, millions, I don't know, what's your traffic now? Like tens of millions of
30 million a month.
30 million people a month. They're reading this stuff. So like, they kind of think you can't pretend it doesn't exist. I mean, we have 1.2 million reviews of real estate agents on Zillow, where consumers, buyers and sellers of homes have written reviews about their agents. And we hear this from agents sometimes. They don't want to respond to the reviews for sort of the same reason. But it's the same thing. It's like we have this huge traffic. People are researching you. Before hiring you, they'll go read your reviews on Zillow as a real estate agent. So like, isn't it better to join the conversation than ignore it?
Yeah.
Agreed.
I think it's more, for us, it's more about once you respond and then they respond again and you go back and forth.
There is no back and forth.
Yeah.
So let's just be crystal clear about that. And you're right about that. The back and forth is problematic. We don't allow it. So we're a one response model. TripAdvisor does this. I think even maybe Yelp's this model.
Ours too.
You respond, end of story.
Yeah.
There is no back and forth.
The hairy ones, the ones that get hairy are the legal ones. We know who the employee is. They were fired for some, really bad thing, and they're making some accusation, and we can't be transparent in our response of like, dude, like, you shouldn't have been drinking on the job. That's why you were fired. Don't say that it's because of this. Like, we know why you were fired, right? So we can't say that. So we have to like politely acknowledge and do our best. So those are the ones that I guess bug me the most. But
take the high road. But yeah, you're right. It's harder, but
all right, let's open it up to the audience. We've got a question here in the middle, and we have a roaming mic that we'll get to you momentarily.
So just staying on this same topic, you talked about there's certain things and then the data comes later that reinforces that. And you're talking about the negative reviews. The people who put negative reviews, such as the employee who's been fired for, if you fire 2 employees, the likelihood of both of them putting a review is probably 100%.
yeah.
And if you've got 20 employees that are really happy, the likelihood of them leaving a review that they're happy might be 1%.
Yeah.
So do you have data that says what percentage leaves negative and what percentage positive?
So first off state, we feared this problem at the birth of Glassdoor, that we would have this weird bimodality in our data where people would either love their company or hate their company. And so we architected the site from day one to try and combat that, which is why, we're a give to get model. You can't actually use Glassdoor unless you tell your story, unless you give us some piece of data. You can, because you all have special access, employer center access, but as a normal person, you can't. Which means if you're job searching or you're making a decision, or you're even trying to decide whether the bonus you just got from your existing employer is fair, you're gonna have to tell us your story. And that dampens that bimodality. That means we get a very broad distribution of data from a very broad set of people. And you can see it. The data says basically 67% of people are satisfied in their job, which is about what you'd expect. About 2/3 of people they're satisfied. There are outliers that love and are passionate about their culture, and there are outliers that don't. But if you were to graph our reviews, it's a leaning bell curve towards satisfied, with the apex at satisfied.
So I can just quick data. We field a employee survey outside of Glassdoor every 6 months to 2,000 employees. We get really high response rate. 1,600 people out of 2,000 respond to it. And the data there about employee sat maps pretty closely to the Glassdoor data. So it doesn't, to my surprise, and I guess because of good product work, it doesn't actually skew as negative as you think. It doesn't skew negative.
We have time for one more question from the audience. Got one right over here. So we've got a mic coming to you, so just hang on one second.
My name's Jenny Chenoweth. Thank you for being here today. My CEO actually has a 100% approval ranking. You might know him. His name is Tom Siri.
I do know Tom. I do know Tom. Tom is a
So
great guy.
we're actually in the process. I work for realself.com in Seattle. We're in the process of hiring a VP of brand and marketing, right? Our brand and consumer brand right now. In your 2 companies, who does employer brand go into? Either into marketing or into recruiting? Into Annie?
So at my company, it's in HR, not recruiting, not marketing. But HR then reports to our COO, who also oversees marketing. So for us, I could kind of answer the question either way. A marketing-centric head of HR, I guess, is the way to think about it. But I guess if it were a more traditional company, to answer your question, I really think that to do all this stuff right, all this stuff we're talking about, this is not solely an HR function. It cannot be siloed in HR, especially because if the CEO and the board think, oh, that's just some HR thing, then it'll never work. So somehow find a way to get into get outside of HR with this stuff. That's the way to do it. Either you have a CEO who has buy-in, or you find some other way to sort of get it out of the HR silo.
We see it all over the place. To answer the specific question, at Glassdoor, it's shared between corporate affairs and HR. And corporate affairs then is part of marketing. Because it is about our company's image and brand and everything else. It's that double helix thing again. But we see it as part of marketing sometimes. We see it as part of HR frequently, employer branding, but they're not doing it at the level that you're doing it either. I think you're right. To really be playing at the highest level, it's got to have to pull in marketing.
Great. All right. Well, Spencer, Robert, and Corinne, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your experience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.